Hey everybody, welcome to Crazy Tech Lab, and I've got an awesome video for you today because I'm going to be talking about this case here. Do you remember what it was called? Who made it? Hopefully you do, if you've been watching some of my previous videos. It is, of course, the NZXT H1. Actually, it's not the NZXT H1. It is the NZXT H1 version 2. That's right, this is a brand new revised version of the original H1. It's bigger. NZXT claims it's hopefully better. It has fixed a lot of the issues, obviously that main one in particular with the riser cable. It has fixed that. Now includes a PCI Express 4 riser cable with a whole new mounting system and a whole other bunch of things besides. So it's great to see this case back because, as I mentioned, it is one of my favorite Mini-ITX cases. So what we'll be doing today is doing some comparison tests between the version 2 and the version 1. Seeing which one cools your hardware the best, and with particular attention being paid to the RTX 3000 series from NVIDIA, because any of those cards that have the flow-through fan, the exhaust that essentially comes out the top, the backplate side of the card, didn't really fare too well in the original H1 because the motherboard tray extended up back past that graphics card, leaving you with barely millimeters to spare between that rear exhaust fan and the motherboard tray, basically hampering cooling significantly. This case though, a whole bunch of things going on inside that hopefully fix that problem. As I said, we've also got a brand new PCI Express 4 riser cable, which will fix the issue that the original case had, and a whole bunch of other things besides. So lots and lots of things to get through here today, and including a system build, and we'll be using the Gigabyte Z590 Vision D here, which is again one of my favorite Mini-ITX motherboards. Just thought I'd go with something with a white theme because I've got the white NZXT H1 version 2 here. So we'll be testing a Core i9 11900K in this build to see how the all-in-one liquid cooler, which is bundled with the H1 as it was with the previous version, fares at dealing with a high-end CPU. So lots and lots of things to get through today. Price-wise, we've got a higher price for the new version 2 for a couple of reasons, which we'll get to in a minute, and it is $399 or £339 here in the UK. So couple of reasons for that. We've got a more powerful power supply. The power supply rating has gone up from 650 watts to 750 watts. We've got a PCI Express 4.0 compatible riser cable versus PCI Express 3.0, and we also have an additional case fan as well. So I know that lots of you have been out there modifying this case with extra fans and vents and all that kind of stuff. NZXT has taken a lot of that on board and included them as standard with the case. And if you look at the ventilation holes down the side here, they are bigger as well. So there should be better ventilation. You've got more active cooling inside the case as well. So lots and lots of things that we need to take a look at later on. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel though. It means a lot to have your support, and the more subscribers I get, the more attention my channel gets, and just helps me keep the channel going basically. And also don't forget to like and comment on the video as well. Always love hearing your guys' comments both on my videos and the product I'm looking at. Do you own an NZXT H1? Did you want to? Were there some issues with it that you felt that you couldn't deal with for whatever reason? Do you think that they're addressed with this new case? So obviously let me know in the comment section below. In the description below, you can find links to all this hardware. You can find my eye candy laden social media accounts, especially Instagram. Definitely worth signing up to that one to see pretty much daily updates on there of what I'm working on and crazy PCs that I'm building and that kind of thing. So definitely check me out on Instagram. Also in the description below, you can find timestamps to various sections of testing and discussion in this video, so don't forget to check those out as well if you just want to focus on the cooling or the conclusion. Just, you know, if you don't have the time to watch the whole video, just flick through and watch the conclusion at the end if you want to. Obviously I would prefer it if you watch the whole video, but that's up to you. So a whole bunch of testing to get through then, including a side-by-side comparison between the new case and the old one to see which is new, or what is new rather, and cooling comparison between the two cases to see just how much the cooling has improved, both in terms of processors and graphics cards, and coming to some conclusions at the end after we've built a PC inside of it, of course. So let's crack on. Okay, so here we are with the two models side by side, and what is immediately obvious is that the version 2 of the H1, which you can see on the right, is slightly taller than the original. Another thing that NZXT has changed are the ventilation holes. They're actually slightly larger on the newer version than they were on the old one too. The ports, you also get a second USB 3 port on the top. So as you can see there, 2 Type A ports and 1 Type C port. And on here, of course, you've just got the single Type A port, which is there, of course, and the single Type C port. So you're gaining an extra port on top. Potentially useful for some people. And I should add that this is my own custom NZXT H1, the purple one. It wasn't available in purple originally, but I'm sure you can agree that I reckon NZXT should definitely offer up a purple one because I think it looks absolutely fantastic. So what we will do now is just flip the lids on both of these cases and we will take a look inside. And the actual mounting mechanism for both the side panels is pretty much the same. So you've got a flip open panel here. I'll just see if I can do that on the camera for you now. So yeah, this one just pops off like so, really easy, and then you can get inside. There's no mesh on that one because this is basically an exhaust, or should be used as an exhaust out of the box, because as you can see here, we have a 92mm exhaust fan which sits in the GPU chamber. So that is basically exhausting right where the RTX 3000 series card will be exhausting out of its top mounted vent. So that's hopefully going to improve things. This is basically very similar to some of the mods that I saw for the NZXT H1 online. A lot of people had small, like 40mm or 60mm fans down here, just trying to get some air out of the case. So there is now a fan mount here. Pretty much everything else though is the same. You've got a PCI Express 4.0 riser cable down here, and that, as you can see, is much more substantial than the previous version. It's a completely different design. And if we flip things around, you'll see that the power supply is pretty much the same. There is one big change there, which we'll get to in a minute. And if going around here, just the way the power supply is orientated, the actual type of power supply has changed as well. So we've got the connector up there. Actually, something else I've actually noticed looking at the power supply is that on the old one, you did actually get an on and off switch, which you can see down there. That has gone on the new version of the power supply. So probably not that useful. For most people. I mean, when the case is built, you won't be able to access that anyway, but if for whatever reason that's a deal breaker, I can't imagine why it would be, then that's just a point that you'll need to remember. So what I'll do now is just get the other panels off, and we can take a deeper look inside. So here we are with the top U-section panels removed, and we can see the interiors of both cases. So obviously the one on the right being the new one, it's slightly tidier because I have been using the NZXT H1 over the last year or so, and you can see how things are kind of playing out in terms of the storage and the layout at the top of the case. So we've got the fan here blowing straight through that exhaust, whereas that is completely absent on the old model. Power supply is obviously in exactly the same place, just a slightly different location for the power plug. And if we just move these panels outwards a second so we can start flipping stuff around, you will see that there has been a change in the power supply. So this is the old model here that was rated at 650 watts. That is an SFX-L power supply, so slightly longer than your standard SFX, but we have moved to SFX. So we've got a smaller power supply in the version 2 of the case, but this is now rated at 750 watts. So we've got an increase in the power rating with a smaller power supply. So we'll have to remains to be seen what the noise level is like. Usually it's lower with your SFX-L PSUs than it is with SFX, just because you're dealing with a bigger fan which blows more air, generally speaking. So an interesting move from NZXT, which has provided a little bit more space, but obviously the main reason why we are looking at an SFX power supply being used, and this may well be controversial, I don't know, maybe it's like the new controversial point of the NZXT H1 V2, is the inclusion of this little box of tricks here, which is a cam enabled fan controller. So we've got software fan control for both the CPU fan on the AIO liquid cooler, the rear 92mm fan as well that we just saw a minute ago, and also for the pump. So they are all connected up to this fan controller, and that is powered by a SATA cable, which you can see there, and it's just kind of in this neat drop down metal kind of clad box around here, and then software control as well via a USB port on your motherboard, or specifically a USB 2 header. You'll need a spare one of those to actually hook up here. So both the fans are, let me just get one off here just so I can absolutely double check. So these are standard 4-pin fans, as you can see. So if you didn't want to use the software control, you can just connect these straight to your motherboard. The pump, on the other hand, is different. It has its own proprietary connector, and I'm just trying to see in there to see what the score is, or whether that's just for lighting or something like that, or whether it is actually fully controlled by the box. I think it probably is, but I would imagine that if you don't want to use the software control, what you can do is just plug this in and the pump will run at full speed anyway. So you could, in theory, run the pump from this box of tricks here, and then have the two fans connected to your motherboard, so you can have more control over them. And generally that's what you want to do with an AIO liquid cooler as well, because their pumps aren't particularly powerful in a lot of cases, and you will want to have those pumps running at full speed to not limit your cooling. So flipping things around from the side, and what we can see in the original case, and if I just offer up the RTX 3070 Ti that we've got here, so basically in the case, which way are we having it? So basically the card would sit like this, or like that in there, and as you can see, flipping around here, you've got this exhaust fan here, and in the original case, that sits right up against that panel in there. There's literally just a few millimeters of clearance, which is not good. And even adding fans to the side of the case, you're not really solving that situation at all, really. You might see a couple of degrees knocked off the temperature, but the problem is this whole area is just going to heat up massively. So moving over to the new case, you can see that we now have an open section up here. It's completely open. The only thing you've got in there is the storage bay for the 2.5-inch SSDs, if you need some of those. Now, unfortunately, I think, looking at it, I'm just going to check by having a look around the other side, because I just want to see if that is removable. I think it actually is. So let me just flip that round again. Sorry, I'm investigating with you guys here, because NZXT pulled the NDA forward, so I'm literally doing it by the seat of my pants here. And this section is removable, which is really, really interesting. So that means that the rear fan on your RTX series card, like this, actually has a whole lot more room in the new case than it does in the old one. And as a further benefit, you have the 92mm fan drawing air from that rear exhaust fan on your RTX 3000 series card straight out of the case. So that is really, really interesting. And I think another bit of testing that I'm obviously going to have to do is to remove this section here to see what difference that makes, because I lay a pound to a penny that you're going to get even better cooling if you remove that 2.5-inch cage up there, to give you the graphics card even more room, because you can see that it is partially obscuring that fan intake as well. So Very, very interesting move here from NZXT. In my view, if you're in a Mini-ITX case, you should be using M.2 SSDs as well, just to reduce your cables, reduce cable clutter, and just make your life easier. In this case, it could actually improve cooling on your graphics card as well if you ditch your 2.5-inch SSDs and go with a much more open area up here by using M.2 SSDs. So you can ditch that whole cage section up there. So pretty interesting as far as that goes. And this is the new riser cable. PCI Express 4 compatible, much more substantial than the last version. And yeah, great to see that NZXT has hopefully fixed the issues of the previous one, as well as offering PCI Express 4 support. That probably goes again with the extra fan, with the new PCI Express 4 riser cable, and the fan controller that we've got here. All those three things combined, obviously resulting in a higher price tag for this model, as well as the power supply, of course. That's now a higher rated power supply, even if it is a smaller, potentially noisier SFX versus SFX-L PSU in the older version. So that is pretty much it as far as the walk around and what's new is concerned. So all that's left now is to do the cooling and see how everything performs. Okay, so I thought I'd just talk about the power connectors for a moment with the power supply. And as you can see here, we have 3 8-pin power connectors. They can obviously be split down to 6-pin if you need to. But for those of you that were wondering what kind of caliber of power, graphics card you can actually fit in here, you do have the option of powering a 3 8-pin graphics card. But the only downside, of course, is, as you can see down here, there are only 2 PCI expansion slots down there. So a triple slot card is a no-no, but you do have the extra space down here for like a 2.5-inch slot card, as long as you don't need that actual 3rd slot down there, because there's no way to actually fit that down there. There's no way for that bracket to actually go. You do have a little bit of extra clearance though if you do have something that's 2.5 slot, as I say, and you do have the power to go with it as well. Okay, so now we've finished the build and all the testing, let's take a look at those thermal results. And what we can see is a clear difference in the CPU temperature between the version 1 and version 2. Version 2, with the SSD cage in place, was 3 degrees C cooler on the CPU temperature. That's cooling a toasty Core i9 11900K. So these temperatures, yes, they're with an all-in-one liquid cooler, which you would generally expect to perform reasonably well, but it is with one of the hottest running processors out there. Also, so that's 3 degrees C knocked off by the version 2, and if you remove the SSD cage, that gives a little bit of extra cooling, an extra degree knocked off, but to be honest, that's probably within the margin of error here anyway. So anyway, definitely a benefit to moving to the newer case for CPU temperatures. GPU temperatures, of course, are much more important, given what we've seen previously with the original H1. Without the SSD cage, the GPU temperature was 75 degrees C, and with the SSD cage installed, it was 77 degrees C. Now that, in my first point, that's actually quite interesting, because I thought there would be a bigger difference here, given the fact that I was using an RTX 3070 Ti Founders Edition card with a flow-through fan. there's only 2 degrees C difference between having that cage in there and not having it. So if you do have 2.5-inch SSDs you want to migrate to this case, you don't really need to sell those and convert all your SSDs to M.2 SSDs and mount them on the motherboard. There isn't really a significant reason for doing that. Had there been 5, 6, 7, 10 degrees C difference, that might have been a different scenario, but with just 2 degrees C difference, it's really not worth it. So compared to the version 1 though, without the SSD cage, that was a 5 degrees C difference in the GPU temperature, and 3 degrees if you have the SSD cage in place. However, that does not tell the whole story, because if we look at the average GPU boost frequency, we can see that there is an extra 40 megahertz being added, in my test at least, to the version 2 because it kept the card cooler, whereas the H1 version 1 lost 40 megahertz on the GPU frequency. So what that means is that the card would have actually been running hotter still than we saw in those thermal results, but because it was bouncing off the limiter, it was reining itself in to try and keep itself cool. So actually, the V2 is even better than those thermal results would suggest at cooling an RTX 3000 series card, which we would expect anyway because it's got the help of a 92mm fan up there, it's got better ventilation and a much wider or larger volume for it to dump its heat into rather than just slamming straight up against that motherboard tray like it did in the H1. So what do we make of the H1 version 2 then? Well, I think NZXT has pretty much fixed the key issues with the original case, which were the riser cable, which had a fault in it, of course, and also the fact that it is PCIe 4.0 now and not 3.0. The other glaring issue was the cooling for RTX 3000 series cards with a flow-through fan design. It didn't really matter which one you used, you were always going to have the problem of zero clearance pretty much between the flow-through fan and the motherboard tray in the H1, which we've got here. In the H1 version 2 though, that situation seems to be much improved. There didn't seem to be that much throttling, if at all, on the RTX 3070 Ti, which is great news, and the temperatures were significantly lower as well. You're probably going to see slightly better temperatures in a more open case that doesn't have the card in kind of a sandwich style arrangement to some extent in this case. So that's just something that we'll just have to live with the H1 given its internal design. But those two issues were the glaring issues for me. But even still, you have to consider that loads of people went out and bought this case even though they knew that. And there are loads of people out there that are, looking forward to future revisions and have modified their cases with extra fans to boost cooling. There are custom side panels. People love this case, and I do as well. So for me, I think NZXT has really stepped up and solved those problems. So the new riser cable, hopefully dealing with previous issues, and being PCI Express 4.0 compatible as well. That means that you won't have any problems with getting the most out of your hardware, but also not having to deal with those stability issues if you forget to turn off PCI Express 4.0 in the BIOS, because this case here is how I found out about that issue. What was it, last year, the year before or something, when I tried to mix a PCI Express 4.0 graphics card with a 3.0 motherboard. And of course, actually no, it was the other way around, wasn't it? It was a 4.0 graphics card with a 4.0 motherboard, but with a 3.0 riser. That 3.0 riser just causes the system to go haywire, and this case is basically the one where I discovered that, and then found lots of other people online were having the issue as well. And then of course we found out that it was mixing a 3.0 riser with 4.0 hardware was the main issue. So thankfully that issue has been solved. The problem with shorting out has been solved, hopefully, and the cooling for RTX 3000 series cards with the flow-through fan design has also been improved. And even if you use a normal graphics card, you will probably see better temperatures as well, because the wider spaced ventilation holes and the additional 92mm fan there aided the graphics card to keep itself cool. So the price, because of those things, and the PSU upgrade from 650 watts to 750 watts has gone up. It's $399 and £399 here in the UK where I am. That is more expensive than the previous version, but You do have to consider that, you know, a 750 watt SFX power supply isn't cheap. Neither are PCI Express 4.0 riser cables, and you're also getting an extra fan and a slightly bigger case. So I think if you're in love with the case, as I am, it's worth that money. And don't forget, you're getting an all-in-one liquid cooler included as well. So all you have to buy really is your core hardware minus the cooler, of course, and the power supply. So you just need a motherboard, processor, memory, graphics card, off you go, basically. So it is expensive, but you have to bear those things in mind. So I'd like to thank NZXT for sending me over the version 2 of the H1. I think it's a fantastic case. Those niggling issues from the previous version have been solved.